Hello and welcome to today's DAV chat. We're going to have a look at the best of political Twitter today and the news relating to Steve Bannon's likely perp walk today as he submits himself to authorities with regards to the alleged fraud that he's already been convicted for at a federal level, but now he's being likely indicted and charged with fraud for the We Build the Wall scam, in which millions of dollars were elicited from Trump supporters who were so super keen to fulfill Trump's dream of a raised, impenetrable border wall across the southern border between the United States and Mexico. Now, Trump refurbished some pre-existing wall, and I think approximately 43 new miles of wall were built during his 4-year tenure in office as the President of the United States. Certainly his dream that he sold to millions of his followers did not come to pass. And there was this private enterprise led by a amputee veteran called Brian Colfard, who's since pled guilty. Steve Bannon didn't plead guilty, but he was convicted, and then he was one of the last-minute pardons from Trump's final hours in office in January of 2021, shortly before the inauguration of current President Joe Biden. So let's have a look at this story about the Oath Keepers and the police chiefs and elected officials that are present on this new leaked list of Oath Keepers. So it's a far-right extremist group that's been accused of playing a role in January the 6th, 2021, that insurrection coup attempt when Trump was exploring a variety of different avenues to try and illegitimately retain his position in the Oval Office, using violent means by inciting his followers to violence, as well as putative legal means when he rolled with the fevered pipe dreams of people like Sidney Powell and John Eastman of the Clarendon Institute, people who argued that there were ways to overturn the legal verified results of the 2020 presidential election by questioning the outcome without any evidentiary support, and even after having lost 60 court cases pertaining to the disputed, contested state results that were nevertheless verified by state officials in each state, and the alternate plans to have pro-Trump electors who would then fulfill their roles in the Electoral College system by signing their names onto certificates to say, we feel like Donald Trump won, so we're signing onto this regardless of the actual state results. Many of those officials did so, violated their oaths of office, etc., because they were persuaded to do so and were responsive to those pleas because of their loyalty to not just Donald Trump, but what Donald Trump represents, which is white hegemonic power and a status quo of unearned privilege and delusional master race style supremacy. So white people are split into some of them vote for Democrats and many of them vote for Republicans. And whenever the fallout of Republican rule and Republican advancement of white supremacy becomes so damaging, so blatantly damaging to the interests of the American people, then you get some backlash. But you also need there to be a degree of penetration through the fog of media complicity with the status quo about what the damage done. So in this case, white supremacist Republican extremism has become quite blatant in a variety of ways, and reporting still has been inadequate in many respects, but it's becoming at least more noticeable to people that American democracy is under threat, because polls of likely American voters now show that concerns about preserving democracy are the number one case in a majority of cases of polled respondents. So what does that mean? It means people are noticing what's happening. It was hard to conceal January the 6th when armed Trump devotees stormed the Capitol building, collectively hospitalized 140 police officers, resulting in the next day death of one victim of that violence from a stroke, one police officer, Brian Sicknick, and four additional police officers attending on that day took their own lives as a consequence, presumably, of the mental and psychological trauma of being attacked by their fellow citizens and accused of being traitors, merely because they were trying to stop Trump supporters from taking over the Capitol building, murdering or taking lawmakers hostage in an effort to prevent the certification of Biden's victory on that day, and therefore throw a spoke in the wheels of a peaceful transition of power, and thereby provide additional impetus to Trump's complicit lawyers who wanted to argue that, well, the constitutional process has been disrupted in one way, so let's just disrupt it in some other ways. They wanted an impetus to activate a part of the Constitution that's not typically used, but it's to resolve contested elections. And it involves throwing back the election, so restarting it and throwing it to one representative from each state in the House of Representatives. And even though Democrats have a majority of representatives in the House, Republicans, purely in terms of numbers of states that they control, they have a higher number of states. So that would have then thrown the election to Donald Trump, presuming that all the Republicans would have been on board with this new version of having an election in a contested situation, which is one representative from each state. Now, let me bring that up on screen, because I don't want people to take my word for it that this is that this is part of, good morning, Christopher, that this is an avenue from the Constitution. So let's go provision, we'll search it up. Provision of the Constitution for contested presidential elections. How's everybody doing today? In September, somebody wrote the president has a constitutional right to contest results. Well, he certainly did contest it in a variety of courts. The Supreme Court wouldn't even hear Donald Trump's case that he was the true winner and that he wanted to allege mean people had stolen it from him. Okay. A contingent election. Here we go. I've got a website called findlaw.com. How US elections work. No, that's for state. Federal contested elections. No, that's still House of Representatives. When can Congress intervene in presidential elections? Okay. Okay, excellent. Okay, so if neither candidate secures a majority vote, according to a provision of the 12th Amendment, there is a contingent election. And according to this provision, the House will choose the next president and the Senate will elect the vice president. I'm going to bring this up on screen so you can see I am not making it up. All right. And to anybody watching on Twitter, I found out that my Periscope account has actually been frozen, and this is why people watching on Twitter can't comment. So I've contacted them to ask that my Periscope account be restored. So just to show you what website I'm on, Find Law, contesting election, last updated on the 2nd of November 2020. So very timely. So the Federal Contested Elections Act. Here we go down here to when can Congress intervene in presidential elections? So normally the presidential candidate who wins each state's popular vote earns that state's electors. This is the system in America by which the results of the electoral college system supersede the outcome of a popular vote. So you don't just have who won the most votes, who appealed to the most people, who managed to be dismissed as a charlatan or fraud by a majority of voters. So Americans have this fomented interstate warfare that's cultivated by Republicans because it serves their purpose for fewer people to vote. Because when people feel discouraged, that they know their vote doesn't contribute to a nationwide tally of who is the best candidate and only counts in the context of their state, and they may live in a state that's against their own political leanings, then that's a disincentive for many people to vote. For example, if you're a blue dot in a red state, instead of your blue vote just adding to the number of votes tallied nationally, whereby all the millions of people that live in California, one of the most successful economies in the world. And I'm just talking about one state. One state in the United States is so successful that it's ranked the 5th largest economy in the world. But the people of California are disenfranchised to an extent because their vote the potency of their vote is shrunk in an electoral college system, and the potency of people from smaller population states is disproportionately increased through the workings of this electoral college system. But anyway, back to this contingent election as outlined in the 12th Amendment. Let me grab my copy of the Constitution so we can read it straight out from there. Won't be a second. The 12th Amendment. Okay. The electors, this was ratified on June the 15th, 1804. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president. The president of the Senate, which in 2020 was Mike Pence, shall in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives open all the certificates, and the vote shall then be counted. Okay. And if no person have such majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers, not exceeding 3 on the list of those who voted for as president, other language here, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. The representation from each state having one vote. So, okay, but in choosing the president, the vote shall be taken by states. The representation from each state having one vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all of the states shall be necessary to a choice. And if the House of Representatives shall not choose a president, whenever the right of choice shall devolve upon them before the 4th day of March next following, then the vice president shall act as president in the case of the death or constitutional or other constitutional disability of the president. The person having the greatest number of votes as vice president shall be the vice president, if such number be a majority. Okay, that's when they had separate elections for vice president and president, but it doesn't matter. This described the contingency election that Trump was working towards. He wanted it to be triggered, and he didn't have the circumstance of no person having a majority, because Joe Biden had the majority of electoral college votes. But he wanted to activate that contingency election by saying, Well, Joe Biden's majority is contested. And he had a lot of accomplices trying to help him trigger that, to exert all of this pressure. We know that a wife of a Supreme Court Justice, Ginny Thomas, wife of Clarence Thomas, was writing to legislators in multiple states we now know, Wisconsin and Arizona. She was emailing legislators, and let's see if we can bring up some of the text of that email, because she was saying, please use your power and authority to do what you know is right. i.e., give Trump a second term in office that he has not won through the voting system, even through the electoral college system. All right, Ginny Thomas email to legislators. This is a form letter that she sent. All right, so I've got two different notifications about this, because in June it became evident she'd emailed dozens of Arizona lawmakers urging them to overturn the election results. And in the 1st of September, it was the news was broken that she had also emailed Wisconsin lawmakers. So I'm bringing up the text of that. So when you hear people talk about Trump's coup, they shouldn't just be talking about Trump's inciting of violence and the people who attacked officers, Capitol police officers, Metropolitan DC police officers. We shouldn't just be talking about Trump's failure to activate the National Guard to defend the home of American legislation. We shouldn't just be talking about that. We should be talking about his motives, the motives of lawyer John Eastman, the motives of environmental lawyer from the DOJ, Jeffrey Clark, in just trying to pick away at the constitutional provisions, so that if they fail to follow some of the constitutional provisions for peaceful transfer of power, they could say the whole election results are negated, and let's throw it to this contingent election provision from the 12th Amendment that says one representative from each state in the House of Representatives. And Republicans held a majority of purely state numbers. So normally in the House of Representatives, you have more than one representative from each state. And in that way, Democrats represent more people and they have more representatives in the House of Representatives. But when this constitutional provision is activated, then only one representative from each state may vote for a president of their own choosing. And which political party represents more states than the other? Not more people, just more states. When you elevate states over actual numbers of voters and actual people exercising self-government through voting, then you are elevating states' rights, which is a cover story for the inheritance of slavery. The psychological underpinning that justified slavery, and the inheritance of deprioritizing justice and deprioritizing care and concern for the American people if they are not white. And that's been the Republican agenda, at least since the Civil Rights Act was signed, at which time there was an inversion of which political party was going to cater to those who sought to preserve white dominance at a political level, and an underserving of Black citizens of the United States. So Molly's here and says hello. And Bob says, look up Moore versus Harper. All right, let's do that. Moore versus Harper. Thanks to anybody who's able to join me today. And I apologize that people on Twitter can't go. Oh, Moore versus Harper. That's the independent state legislature theory. Yes. So that's, is that going to be heard in October of next year or October of this year? It's going to be heard in the October 2022 to 2023 term. Yes. So it's a next year case, but that is the opportunity for the Supreme Court to allow states to subvert their own state constitution, to circumvent the rulings of that state, and to subvert federal law governing voting rights, because the Voting Rights Act was weakened by the actions of the Supreme Court, the conservative stacked Supreme Court previously, and they want to give Republican legislatures who are in their positions because of anti-democratic practices such as gerrymandering and drawing districts in a way to maximize the impact of white voters at the expense of non-white minority voting populations who are more likely to vote for Democratic candidates. And this independent state legislature theory would be the Supreme Court formalizing that state legislatures can do whatever they like, which means they get to overturn whatever election results they like, which means should Donald Trump run for presidency again in 2024, which he's likely to do, it's one of his avenues towards claiming freedom from prosecution, freedom from investigation, for enabling a repeat of the Mueller report, whereby Mueller was too concerned about procedural fairness to be honest with the American public about Donald Trump's significant efforts to obstruct the investigation into whether or not he was a beneficiary of Russian election interference and sought that election interference from Russia. The Mueller report sought to investigate Donald Trump's ties to Russia, and Mueller obeyed Donald Trump's request to not look into his financial relationships with others, meaning that was off the table to look at his financial connections and his financial hopes and dreams of building a Moscow Trump Tower. And Mueller chose this path of bending over backwards to Trump and saying, procedural fairness requires me to not be clear about the president's obstruction efforts because I can't charge him with it, because you can't charge a sitting president, according to this legal memo from the Office of Legal Counsel from 1974. Can't charge a sitting president because it's too disruptive. So therefore, Donald Trump wouldn't have the proper avenue to respond to such an accusation if I accuse him of obstructing justice in an effort to conceal ties with Russia and improper influence from a foreign adversarial nation and the government of an adversarial nation. So I have to say, can't say nothing right now, maybe somebody will later on. And William Barr, the Trump-friendly Attorney General at the time, appointed by Trump, said, I take it upon myself to say this report exonerates Donald Trump. Yeah, no obstruction, no underlying crime. So that was terrible of William Barr. He allowed a foreign asset, Donald Trump, a person of no principles who was for sale and who had no compunction about selling out American interests, the interests of the American people, to whichever adversarial country wanted to influence him and direct American policy. Trump thinks who knows what Trump thinks. But the point is, for me, to frequently reinforce that the man is not an imbecile, the man is not a lunatic, the man is diabolical. Because I don't want people to underestimate the degree to which he will act in a way that's contrary to the interests of the American people if he perceives it advances himself. Now, a lot of white Trump supporters and the smaller proportion of Trump supporters who are Black or Hispanic in background or other nationality, they presume that Donald Trump would never act in a way contrary to the interests of the American people because they so strongly believe in him as a champion of the status quo, of all that is. Well, they think all that is good about America, but they have had it imprinted on their brains that Donald Trump represents good business practice. because they watched him on television for a long time being falsely portrayed as a successful businessman, and they were excited and enthralled at the idea of a successful person leading the United States to a similar exalted level of business success. So they conflate in their mind whatever Donald Trump wants. That's conflated with the genuine interests of the United States. And when those interests come into conflict most strongly, that's when Americans are most in danger. So when Trump is aware that there's a lot of money attached to documents, White House documents, be that about nuclear capabilities of another nation, as we now know those documents were found in Donald Trump's storage cupboards in Mar-a-Lago, then he will steal those documents and keep them at his property, or the place that appears to be his property. It may not be. The Trump organization may own it in place of actual literal Donald Trump. When COVID was a pandemic, a crisis that needed consistency of messaging and responsible and concerted action on behalf of the federal government, it was in Trump's interests at that point, or what he understood to be his interest, was to manipulate people's reality, to claim that COVID wasn't a big deal. And so any Democrats that were connected to reality and to the scientific conclusions about what needed to be done, they were all out to oppress everybody and lie to them that COVID was real. So you still have that conviction that COVID was not a real threat. Simultaneously, that COVID was an attack from China. So Republicans who harbor resentment towards migrants and want to preserve white purity in America, that they are the only ones who will protect you from these biological style attacks. Oh, I've got to go soon. It sounds like a Republican legislator could disallow his loss in an election. Yes, that's absolutely what the independent state legislature theory would facilitate, in the advent that in October of 2023, the Supreme Court makes that ruling, which they're quite likely to do, given their lack of respect for law, precedents, the interests of the American people, etc. They are, Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, those two Supreme Court justices were formerly lawyers who assisted with the unjust result of awarding the election to George W. Bush in the year 2000, when the recount in Florida was stopped by request from Jeb Bush, one of George W. Bush's brothers, who was then the governor of Florida, halted the recount in Florida, and that case went to the Supreme Court, and they found in Bush's favor. And the reward for some of those lawyers, Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh, was ultimately to be appointed to the Supreme Court bench and to play a historic role in stripping 50 years worth of legal protections from women who subsequently are in a position where access to abortion across the United States is under threat. And certainly in red states, abortion bans have come into effect straight away, and more will over the coming days. And in those cases of abortion bans, women who don't want to continue with a pregnancy are either compelled to seek treatment out of state, or are compelled to proceed with a pregnancy that they don't want, with an undesired pregnancy. And that's recognized by the World Health Organization as a form of torture, to forcefully compel a woman to continue with a pregnancy and to deprive her of the opportunity to discontinue that pregnancy through medical means. Now, I understand it's a lot easier for people to cope with earlier pregnancy discontinuation, so abortion before babies begin to more resemble what we know of as living post-womb babies, but there are instances in which medical necessity to preserve the health or the life of the mother compels a late-term abortion. Well, compels a late-term abortion in states where that's legal, because in other states now, it's a woman's doctors have to feel confident in saying her life is at risk. And when you delay or deny medical care and you say, well, you're in pain, you're suffering, your baby is infected, your fetus is infected, there's no chance that the baby will survive, but it's not dead yet, there's still a detectable heartbeat, so we can't yet treat you, we can't yet proceed with a D&C, or we can't remove this dying baby. You have to carry it at the request of the state, and your life has to be more in danger. When you start messing around with those percentages and you make women's access to medical treatment more complicated, women die. And I've had a man shout in my face, "What percentage?" It's the statistics are not readily at my fingertips of how many women are likely to die, but any woman, the death of any woman caused as a consequence of piously posturing legislators saying your life wasn't sufficiently at risk for us to allow you to get medical treatment that you needed. And you needed it, but it wasn't urgent enough for us, because we've now made this much more of a gray area, because women's bodily autonomy and the women enjoying legal protections to bodily autonomy, that's not acceptable to us, because we choose to pretend that we are advocates for the most tiny and vulnerable people. They're not really advocates for unborn babies, because sometimes women who don't want to have a child, who are forced by the state to bear a child against their will, they cannot offer a good life to that child. And if it sounds like, who am I to say what's a good life? I'm here to say I had children voluntarily, and it's a taxing, difficult, and can be a life-threatening process. Many women die each year around the world, and the United States has the highest maternal death rate amongst all of the developed countries, the highly developed countries. Wow, Bob's noting that Indiana will charge college debt relief as income and tax it at state and local level. Well, if they feel like that's going to be popular, then I guess that's what they're going to do. Indiana is apparently home to a lot of white supremacists who have moved there from bluer states and are taking over positions at school board level, local level, etc., because they are hoping to disenfranchise democracy and self-governance in favor of white militias and in favor of radical extremists in all positions of government, because they have an extra tool in their toolbox of political advocacy, which is violence and the threat of violence. So they have violence and intimidation. Militias are comfortable using that. That's their ladder to power, and it's not part of a healthy, functioning democracy. It's part of a system of oppression and forcing your will on others. So politics is a margins game in most instances, and it's to be hoped that this trajectory continues of independent voters realizing that Republicans have gone too far. They have quietly been amassing power through blocking Democrat appointments to the Supreme Court bench and rushing through Republican president appointments to the Supreme Court bench, like Amy Coney Barrett, making it through in the final weeks of the Trump administration, even though Mitch McConnell blocked Barack Obama from appointing Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court 173 days before a presidential election. Did we see that the names and positions of the Proud Boys was released, including, yes, multiple Republican officials and military members and police officers? Yes, and shouldn't be a surprise to us, a lot of white supremacists infiltrate institutions such as the police force and politics, and they do so because their agenda is to preserve and extend white power, and they actively enjoy acting in an unjust way to people of color. They enjoy taking the social safety net away from Black people if they're politicians. They enjoy enforcing their narrative, their personal understanding of the world, which is that they belong to the master race. They deserve the privileges and perks afforded to being a member of a master race, and they enjoy subjugating others. Yes, sorry, Oath Keepers, not Proud Boys. You're absolutely right. We can bring that up again on screen. And then I have to go. I was going to work on a song. I was going to change the lyrics to some of Chicago music to reflect Steve Bannon's complaint, because it just seemed fitting to me. Okay, let's see if there are any details. Can we see this on screen? Yes. There we go. Oath Keepers. There we go. Okay. All right. So over 38,000 names were leaked from their membership lists, and the Anti-Defamation League, which I think is a Jewish organization, they identified more than 370 people it believes currently work in law enforcement agencies, including police chiefs and sheriffs, and more than 100 people who are currently members of the military, and also identified more than 80 people who were running for or served in office as of early August. The membership information was compiled into a database published by the Transparency Collective, Distributed Denial of Secrets. The data raises fresh concerns about the presence of extremists in law enforcement and the military, who are tasked with enforcing laws and protecting the US. It's especially problematic for public servants to be associated with extremists at a time when lies about the 2020 elections are fueling threats of violence against lawmakers and institutions. Even for those who claimed to have left the organization when it began to employ more aggressive tactics in 2014, it is important to remember that the Oath Keepers have espoused extremism since their founding, and this fact was not enough to deter these individuals from signing up, the report says. Some people on the list contacted by the Associated Press said they were briefly members years ago and are no longer affiliated with the group. Some said they were never dues-paying members. Their views are far too extreme for me, said Sean Mobley, sheriff of Otero County, Colorado. Mobley told the AP, the Associated Press, in an email that he distanced himself from the Oath Keepers years ago over concerns about its involvement in the standoff against the federal government at the Bundy Ranch in Bunkerville, Nevada. What an appropriate town name, Bunkerville. It was founded in 2009 by Stuart Rhodes, who, as you remember, has been charged for his involvement in the violent attempted overthrow of the government on January the 6th. They target current and former military, police, and first responders. It asks its members to vow to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, but promotes the belief that the federal government is out to strip citizens of their civil liberties and paints its followers as defenders against tyranny. So they're big on that type of misinterpretation of the Second Amendment, which, instead of correctly noting that it's supposed to be a well-regulated militia that can have access to weapons, it says, no, everybody can have access to weapons to overthrow the government if necessary. Really? Who deems necessary? White men? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. I mean, having unregulated militia is part of the insecurity of a free state, undermines the safety of the people in a free state. And that's why parents struggle to send their children to school, knowing that America's had 2 mass shootings of elementary school children. 19 children dead in Sandy Hook. And how many dead in Uvalde? Is it the same number? Maybe once you added the teachers, it was 27 adults and children who died in Sandy Hook, and 19 children and 2 teachers who died in Uvalde, Texas. But 2 mass shootings of elementary school children highlights the way that American children are being betrayed by gun fetishists whose misunderstanding of the Constitution is leading to an overproliferation of weapons of mass death, of military-grade weapons that were developed not just to kill people from a distance, but to cause enormous injury. Because if you severely injure a soldier with a bullet that's designed to leave a grapefruit-sized hole, exit wound in a limb or in a torso, that takes 5 people to then try to transport that wounded service person off the field of combat. So AR-15s are designed to maximize bodily destruction without killing a person. But obviously, when used against a child, a grapefruit-sized exit wound will kill them after causing so much carnage that parents are not permitted to see the bodies of their children. They can't say a final goodbye to their murdered children. AR-15 bullets fire with such velocity and a tornado-like direction that they destroy children to the point where they're unrecognizable. So that doesn't require 5 soldiers to remove 1 injured soldier from a battlefield. It just destroys children. And if you get a fragment from such a bullet and have to stifle your screams so that you don't attract a gunman's attention and so facilitate the death of more of your peers, that's also an unconscionable circumstance to have a child put in. But too many children in America experience school shootings because of the stubborn attachment of people to bad ideas, and because of the quietness and silence and apathy of the rest of us who need to be forefront saying this. They don't own the Constitution. Their interpretation of the Second Amendment is wrong and should be openly and frequently challenged. So don't just sit there and say their understanding of the Second Amendment of the Constitution is correct. They can keep going around saying, shall not be infringed. They're quoting a phrase, read in full, a well-regulated militia. And if they're not in a well-regulated militia, they should not have access to weapons of war. They should not have access to weapons that have been purposefully designed to cause such devastating injuries that 5 soldiers will be needed to remove 1 soldier from the field who's received an impact from an AR-15 bullet. Normal citizens outside of a well-regulated militia should not have access to the type of weapons that can cause carnage in a school in that way. So I'm going to go and have lunch with my husband. Thank you for listening to the broadcast today. And don't forget that we do need to advocate for each other and the children of the United States and indeed the world, because we're all contending with an overheating planet. We're all contending with trajectory of that if fossil fuels continue to be used at a similar or expanding rate, then we have more devastating flooding. Pakistan was 1/3, or continues to be probably 1/3 underwater. I'm sure it's draining, but millions of people have been displaced. And if we take that and we imagine that as our homes, and we look at reporting of these flash floods in Rhode Island, in Providence, Rhode Island, heat waves, 116 degrees in cities in California, it's not enough for us to be shrinking violets in the face of willful misreading of the Constitution and willful attachment to a white supremacist former president, a defeated former president who stole documents from the United States government, consequently from the people of the United States, who don't personally retain custody of those documents, but we have self-government, we have self-rule. The government's supposed to keep those secrets for America and maintain those secret compartmentalized provisions to prevent American state secrets from falling into the wrong hands. Donald Trump's hands are wrong because he doesn't respect the Constitution or the American people or guidelines for safe storage of top secret documents. So not only were 43 classified folders found empty in the Mar-a-Lago property, also 104 classified documents. Well, Mississippi is really suffering, yes. And the racist white supremacist state government of Mississippi continues to misappropriate funds, federal funds, into programs other than programs to reform the infrastructure of 80% Black populated cities, such as Jackson. And look, Brett Favre received millions of dollars for speeches he didn't even give that were misappropriated from TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. So there are children and families in Mississippi who suffered while wealthy former football player Brett Favre was given those millions. And I'm sure other pet projects from the Mississippi Governor Tate, also received those monies because they don't want to maintain the social safety net, because some people of color would receive assistance and they cling to a misconception that it's only Black people who receive social safety nets. It's 40% of the people who receive government funds are white people. 23% are Black Americans, and there's other demographics as well. But the point is, racists make the faulty conclusion that it's Black people and that they should not receive funds, that they are not the master race, that they do not deserve the benefits and privileges of living in the wealthiest country in the world, which should have a strong safety net, as other highly developed nations do, as other wealthy nations do. There are too many white supremacists in government who want to exclude Black people from the benefits of living in a wealthy nation, despite the fact that American wealth has been able to escalate in the way it has, initially because of the profitability of the unpaid, compelled laborers who were forcibly enslaved and deprived of their rights to freedom, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But that generated the initial blast of wealth that gave America geopolitical significance and subsequently helped America become a magnet for migrants. Well, not just the wealth, but also the wealth and the judicious investment of some of that wealth in infrastructure that helped build America into a mighty nation, mighty enough to attract migrants whose talent, initiative, and entrepreneurial drive built the second wave of American greatness, which we continue to benefit from now. The infamous welfare queen created by Reagan, exactly. She was a biracial con artist who was in no way representative of typical beneficiaries of social security, but he foregrounded her. Linda Taylor. Is it Linda Taylor? But anyway, thank you, Bob, and Christopher and Molly for listening to the broadcast today. And let's hope that the DOJ appeal Justice Cannon's decision to appoint a special master to give serious consideration to Trump's claim of executive privilege over documents he stole from the American people and proceeded to commingle with his own documents, like his passports and his personal effects and MAGA hats. It's not a defense, and it shouldn't be a way to circumvent the consequences of the law. To say, oh yes, I stole documents, but I put them in boxes with some of my own newspaper clippings. So, you can't steal those newspaper clippings from me. You have to appoint someone to look at all those top secret documents, and maybe will take a bit longer before you can assess whether or not I've committed any crime, which I clearly have, because I'm Donald Trump and, I'm above the law. And clearly some of the judges I've appointed agree with that. I'm so super special. There's nobody like me. Only I can save America. And when I say save America, I mean steal from America. But, you like me getting your money because, I'm so great. And I do great things for America, like lie about the impact of COVID, lie about or conceal the fact that I know it's airborne, fail to take steps to protect the nation because I'm hoping that the worst impact is felt by blue states, and then more people in blue states can die, and then I can also blame blue state governors, and it just really works out well for me. But like, I am America, right? So if something's in my interests, then that's American interest, because I'm like the best of you. Yeah. So Donald Trump, I should never have to face consequences for breaking the law, because I am the law. I am the law, and what I want is what you need. Yep. So that basically should be resisted fervently by the Department of Justice. So if they appeal Florida federal Judge Aileen Cannon's contentious special master ruling, what else can they do? Just try and keep investigating Donald Trump so that he can be deterred from selling American state secrets around the world. That would be great if we could plug that hole in American national security. Donald Trump as a whole is still trying to do wrong and get away with wrong. But I've spoken enough and said I've got to go. Cheerio. Bye, everybody. Okay.